My name is Martin. This is my take on this. Today we're talking about the upcoming Fed meeting that will be on Tuesday, October 28th and Wednesday, October 29th of 2025. So it's widely expected that the Fed will cut rates by 25 basis points. That is 0.25%, right? So currently we're between 4 and 4.25%. So it might be that we're going down to 3.75 to 4%. And so we all think about, okay, what actually does that entail? Will mortgage rates go down? What will that do for the overall economy? Will this be good or will this be bad? We actually don't know that, but in general, we have some sort of ideas on what is happening. So let me actually just play a little video to see what the overall news is actually saying about this. So this is a video from CNBC. It's about 2 days old, and it's in regards to the Fed rate cuts or possible rate cuts that the economists say. As said, it's about 95% of Wall Street is thinking that there will be a rate cut. So let's just see what they have to say about this.
So joining me now is Krishna Guha. He's vice chairman of Evercore ISI. Krishna, it's great to see you again. You know, I think obviously there are different ways to look at everything, and that's sort of why we have these robust discussions here on CNBC. But you call the inflation benign. When I look at 3%, I say, well, isn't that still above the Fed's target rate? And a lot of consumers might say, it doesn't feel so benign, especially after all these months and months of increases.
So that's very fair. Obviously, we're writing for a market audience. And the question is, it's benign for markets for sure. So why? So obviously, the inflation print came in a bit cooler than expected. When you look under the hood, importantly, there was no sign of any sort of catch-up surge of pass-through of tariffs into goods prices. Goods prices, inflation was actually a bit less this month than it was in August. And the services side in the round was pretty well behaved too. Now, when you break that apart, the positive piece there was housing services inflation, very soft. The other services on a CPI measure, a little bit elevated, but in the round, nothing to be concerned about there. And so the absence of bad news on the inflation front gives the Fed a free hand to cut rates in response to labor softness and risks.
Okay, that is really good context. Because you bring up labor softness and risks also as the other part of the Fed's mandate, we've been hearing more about layoffs. Just yesterday afternoon, Target doing a corporate layoff. Not a huge number, 8% of corporate staff. However, it's the first such layoff that we've seen from the company in about a decade. So what do you think, or how do you think that will influence the Fed's thinking on that part of the mandate? Does that change anything for you?
So we always have to be a little careful reasoning from single company examples.
Of course, yeah, that's not the only one, but yes.
As you know well, and you've consistently said, I think obviously the Fed is going to keep a very close eye on layoffs in the aggregate sense.
Of course.
Because we've been in this low hire, low fire equilibrium for a while. But the Fed's always been a little bit edgy that, look, at some point, if the layoffs pick up and hiring is still unbelievably low, then you could see quite a rapid deterioration, for instance, in unemployment. Now, the best measure, of course, in real time as to what's going on there are the weekly UI claims. And because those are aggregated from state data, we actually continue to get good visibility on that through the shutdown. And so far, we've seen those UI claims broadly moving sideways. So we're not seeing any kind of red alert from the unemployment initial claims, but certainly, we would track, and the Fed would track layoff announcements and be very attentive to whether we start to see any pickup in that aggregate measure of the initial unemployment claims.
And as we sit here at day, 23 of the government shutdown, and we're starting to talk about missing paychecks effective today for some of these government workers, there also early on was discussions or maybe threats of reduction in force. So not just a furlough, but a permanent reduction. How are you understanding what's going on there when you're talking about government jobs and how that may be impacting the labor market right now?
So you're absolutely right that in addition to the sort of underlying, if you like, private sector labor market dynamics, we have to keep a very close eye on what's happening with federal and state and local employment. So actually, on the federal side, there's actually two things going on, of course, because as you know, we're waiting for the lagged effect of the Doge layoffs, those negotiated severances, to hit the data over the next couple of prints on the labor market side. So there's a lagged effect we already know is in the pipeline there. Then on top of that, we're going to see the furlough effects. And of course, those are going to affect the potentially create some noise around the unemployment rate. And of course, also if paychecks are not coming out, this can potentially be some kind of fairly small, but some kind of macroeconomic impact on the demand side as well. So we're going to have to think carefully about these federal government labor market effects that are taking place right now. But I think the Fed and the rest of us in the economics profession will be trying to focus as best we can on getting a read of where the underlying private sector, payrolls, the underlying private sector labor market dynamics are, because ultimately that's going to sort of shape where we're going from here when we work through these near-term, very prominent government employment issues.
So this was a video that's more about the general view on the economy, if you will, including the shutdown that's happening right now in the US government. We don't really know what effect that really has on the overall economy. I'm sure it has some sort of effect because that's like hundreds of thousands of employees that are not getting paid. Of course, that money is missing for these people, first of all, but second, this money is not flowing into the economy any longer. So that, of course, will have some effect. And as he said, it will be a minor effect. Still, it will be an effect. But in general, it looks like that the Fed will cut rates. That's kind of the overall consensus of things. And I personally think, yes, when this is happening, I don't think it actually will have a big impact on Main Street USA, right? It will not have a big impact on the general public, on the general Americans. I think what will happen is there will be another, let's say, smaller run on the stock market. It will go up even higher, even though all the exchanges have reached their highest points already. But if the Fed cuts rates by the end of this week, there will be actually higher and higher values in the stock market because that's kind of fueling the stock market. But in general, for the general public, there will not be many changes. So as an example for the mortgage rates, so when in September the Fed cut rates by 25 basis points, it was expected that the mortgage rates will go down. Actually, that did not happen. They actually went up. They went from 6.26% to 6.39% for a 30-year fixed mortgage, right? So we don't know what will happen when the Fed is cutting the rate this week, if it will affect mortgage rates or not, because we have to remember mortgage rates are tied to the 10-year Treasury yields and not to the federal funds rate. Yes, the federal funds rate will have some sort of an impact sooner or later on the 10-year Treasury yields. So there is a chance that mortgage rates might slightly go down, but they will still be elevated over the 6% mark, I'm pretty sure. So we'll have to see how that actually works out in the future. But because that is kind of the main or the most important part for the average American to actually lower their monthly mortgage payment. And so far we have not seen that anything is coming down in that area, and a lot of people are struggling. There's a lot of houses that are being now sold, way under price, just to get them sold, because otherwise you're stuck with this high payment and you cannot afford that high payment. Because the thing is, when people bought those houses 3-4 years ago, they were told by the realtors and the bankers, yeah, in 2-3 years rates will go down again to, let's say, 4%. You just refinance, everything will be good. And so far this did not happen. And this latest rate cut that will come up soon might again not really do anything for the housing market that actually people will be able to afford their houses again. So we will have to see how this actually works out, because everything is still elevated. It's still very pricey. The inflation rates is still not at the 2%. So I personally think that this rate cut is mainly for the stock market, to be honest. And Main Street USA and the average American, they will not get anything from this rate cut. It might actually be the opposite, because it might be easier for them to actually get more credit, meaning maybe you get an increase in your credit card limit or something like that, or you can just have a larger credit on your bank account, these type of things. So I think that actually could be possible, which I personally think is just a negative effect, because then people have even more debt, and we don't want that. But that's kind of where this is going. So far, it's not going to help the average American. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But yeah, so that's my take on this current situation when it comes to the economy, to the Fed meeting this week. We'll have to see how it goes. But in general, it's expected that they lower the rate again by 25 basis points. And when that is happening, as said, I personally think the stock market will have another rally. Will go up another, maybe the Dow Jones, I would guess about another 300 to 500 points. But other than that, it will not actually impact the average American. Okay. Well, so that was it for this video. It's a shorter video today, but we will have another video coming up again in a week's time. Please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching. Alrighty, bye.